So far we've learned that there is a third aspect to the Hebrew verb, this preterite or wow consecutive. And there is also another thing related to this that is not a separate aspect, but a kind of secondary development, and that is the perfect wow consecutive. So we're seeing imperfect wow consecutives. And this thing really is a bit of a nuisance, quite frankly. For one thing, this is not a real sort of a real aspect or separate tense the way the preterite is. This is a kind of secondary development, something that happened probably by analogy, although that's debated among scholars. We've got our perfect form katal, and regardless of how it developed historically, whether by analogy with the imperfect, this is not a real separate tense, the wow consecutive perfect. What we get is a form that develops with adding the wow in the front and pointing it just like the regular conjunction. So wow with a schwa beneath it. So this form, wakatal, is the perfect with a conjunction, and the same form, wakatal, is the wow consecutive perfect. Fortunately, these aren't all that common, but it's a real nuisance to to decide when you've got one or not most of the time. The best way to determine whether you've got one of these or not is from the context. If you've got a kind of narrative sequence that begins with an imperfect, right? If you've got a kind of yip, tol, dot, 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 wa, ka, tal kind of sentence, then just the sequence of verbs here, will make you think it's very likely that this is intended to be a wow consecutive perfect, and then is translated just like the verb that precedes it. So this is a secondary development. It's not a true tense or aspect like the preterite is. Perhaps that doesn't make any difference in terms of how you actually treat it and translate it. It is most often translated as though it were an imperfect. Okay? In other words, like it changes tense. That's not actually what happens, but that's what the net result is most of the time. Because these are more flexible in their use. You find in Hebrew narrative that you not only have this imperfect wow consecutive perfect formation, you'll also have something like this. You'll have an imperative. We haven't had imperatives yet, but we do have them in Hebrew, commands. You'll have an imperative followed later on by a wow consecutive perfect. So how will you translate this wow consecutive perfect? Anybody like to guess? No, you translate it as another imperative. Okay. What happens? So this is sort of much more flexible in its use. It doesn't just, whereas the standard preterite or wow consecutive imperfect is a narrative tense. That is, it's used in narrative to indicate the next action in the sequence. This thing, which is kind of evolved as a secondary feature, is actually used for most any other part of the verb. It will follow when it follows in a sequence like this. So whatever it follows is what you translate it as. So if you've got imperative, dot, 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 wow consecutive perfect, translate this one as another imperative. If you've got infinitive, we haven't had infinitives yet either, but if we have infinitive followed by wow consecutive perfect, translate the wow consecutive perfect as an infinitive. So it's more flexible than the preterite is, which is really a narrative kind of form used in narrative. Fortunately, these are not as common, and so that means there's less trouble, but it also means we stumble over them when we do see one because we're not used to seeing them. Now there is, if we go back to our exercises, if you've got your exercise book there or your textbook, to number 4 this morning that we looked at very briefly. We were looking at these as we went through them. Number 4 is the form w shama. Here, number 4. This morning, when we went through these, we Professor Bartelt said, "What is this?" And you said it's a perfect with the conjunction on the front. Be translated, "and he heard," and that's right. But that's only half the story. It could also be a while consecutive perfect. Okay, this could be either one. The fact is that without some context in which to place it, there's no way to tell. So just to show you how that works, and we'll touch on a couple of those as we look at the rest of the exercises as well. There's one other thing.
And it's translated in the same way as the prior verb to it.
Yes, if it's a while consecutive perfect.
Whatever that verb is.
Yes, yes, that's right. If it's a while consecutive perfect, you translate it whatever the preceding verb is. And it'll always occur in some sequence. So when, and these again are much less common than while consecutive imperfects or preterites, which are very, very common.
So we can never have one when it's an individual word given to be parsed.
You probably, well, you can never be sure which one it is, except in this case that I'm getting ready to tell you about right now. There is one kind of form where you can tell about these while consecutive perfects, and that is this. Just make some more writing space. When you have a form with an ending on the end, like, so let's take the first person form, katal t. Okay, katal t. And we want to make this form while consecutive perfect. So we add the while and the schwa beneath it. Now, so far we can't tell whether, as we just said, whether this is perfect with a conjunction or a while consecutive perfect. Except that in the Hebrew Bible, when the Masoretes want to make sure that you read it as a while consecutive, they do this. They put an accent mark here. Okay? Now this is really queer. Okay, there's no way around this. Here's what's wrong with this form if you're looking at this from a Hebrew perspective. First, these light consonantal suffixes don't take accents in Hebrew. Okay, remember the accent, if you remember your paradigm, it's katal, katla, katalta, katalt, katalti, accent on the middle. With the heavy endings, tim and tin, then the accent moves to the back. Katal tim, katal tin. But these light consonantal accents light consonantal endings don't take the accent. So the fact that this is here over this, light consonantal accent is a big flag that says, hey, look at this. This is a weird form. Okay? Pay attention to this. Now what else? If this were behaving normally, if the accent were here, what else would happen to this form? Yeah, right here, right? This would be accent, tonic, tonic, pretonic, propretonic, propretonic comments are reduced to schwa. Right? Then what would happen? You get